The purpose of Wealth Talk is to educate, inform, and hopefully entertain you on the subject of building your wealth. WealthBuilders recommends you should always take independent financial, tax, or legal advice before making any decisions around your finances.
Welcome to episode 208 of Wealth Talk. My name is Christian Rodwell, the Membership Director for WealthBuilders, joined today by our founder, Mr. Kevin Whelan. Hello, Kevin.
Hi, Chris. Good to be with you again. And
yes.
Lots of things happening on the news, doom and gloom everywhere. And I guess we've got a good voice today to penetrate through that gloominess and give us all hope for at least one of the wealth building pillars. But more of that in a moment, I guess.
Yes, well, yeah, we are focusing predominantly on property today. So out of our 7 pillars of wealth, the property portfolio pillar is number 4. Maybe worth touching for a second. We will introduce our guest, who actually is Simon Zutshi. So stay tuned, because Simon always has some wonderful insights into the market. He's been investing for a long, long time. But of course, there are multiple pillars which you can use to build your wealth. Property is a very popular one. We know that in the UK, Kevin. But we're going to be talking today about markets. You said about change. The news is always doom and gloom. And sometimes you have to adapt, don't you, as a wealth builder?
I think there's a key distinction to make here, that as a wealth builder, building assets, you've got a job to do, which I think is best articulated by saying this. A wealth builder is trying to create certainty from uncertainty, right? In other words, how do you get a predictable stream, multiple streams of recurring revenue, to make you financially bulletproof from all eventualities, in all economic circumstances, whether they're in the rise, whether in the fall, whether in the wax or the wane? You've got enough of a diverse range of assets that you own or control. You don't have to own everything. Controlling an asset is just as important as owning it. And I think Simon will touch more about that as well, with lease options, for example, and more on that when we debrief, I guess. But when you recognize that life is uncertain, but you're trying to create certainty, the joy of this is knowing that uncertainty is permanently there, right? And there are 2 types of uncertainty, Chris: disruptions, disasters. And there are 2 types or 2 impacts: macro and micro. In other words, then, a disruption is something that happens that affects your current flow, right? So an interest rate increase, that's a disruption. It impacts on flow. It's a macro, in other words, it's happening to everybody, but how you deal with it is uniquely you. And this is really important, because how you deal with something, if you're a true wealth builder, you look at how are other people dealing with it. Because wherever somebody sees an opportunity, somebody sees a problem. We all know this whole concept, and Simon talks a lot about motivated sellers. Well, that's just another way of framing the same thing, which is somebody seeing a problem, you see an opportunity. They want to get rid of something, you can acquire it or you can control it. So that's the disruption. And the disruptions are either proactive or reactive. So you choose to do something, you disrupt yourself, like you choose to give up the rat race. That's you. A reactive one is you're having to react because something's happened to you. You've just been fired, right? You've got to react to that. And so there are always going to be disruptions, big ones, little ones, things you choose to do and things that happen to you. And I think the joy of being a wealth builder is you can always choose. You can always choose your response, which means you're always responsible. And that responsibility means to be aware of what's happening, macro, micro, be aware of what's happening in markets, be aware of changes like AI, the use of new tools, and be constantly on vigil And that way, it's a joy to be a wealth builder. Where other people are seeing doom and gloom, I see opportunity. Where Simon has been around for a long period of time, he sees opportunity. He doesn't see doom and gloom. You'll listen to Simon, you never feel doom and gloom with Simon. He's pragmatic. He's not just an optimist. He's a pragmatic guy with lots of experience. And I think it's really important to tune in to what other people say, not to do what they do, but to listen to what they have to say and decide, how do you choose to react to that? And the Kiyosaki point, which I love, Robert Kiyosaki, is your wealth is determined by the ability you have to make distinctions. And distinctions is looking at the situation and seeing how you choose to react and getting lessons from other people to help you sharpen your sword so that you can react in a way that serves you, not to the disadvantage of others, but it serves you and solves somebody else's problem. You asked a very short question, and I gave you a very long answer. Sorry about that.
That's okay. It was very, very well delivered there. And it's the setting of your sail, isn't it? As Jim Rohn always said, the same wind blows on us all, but we can have a different reaction. And depending on that, a different outcome. Some will end up exactly where they choose to be, and others will let the wind blow them in all sorts of directions. So let's listen to Simon. As always, a really enjoyable conversation, and I hope you enjoy listening to this too. And we'll be back with the debrief right after. Simon, welcome back to Wealth Talk today. How are you?
I'm really well, thanks, Christian. Thanks so much for asking me back.
Yeah, no, it's always a pleasure to have you on the show, Simon. And, many of our listeners, of course, will know you, the founder of the Property Investor Network. You've been investing, I believe this year, is it 28th year anniversary of being?
Yeah, this month actually is my 28th anniversary of buying my own home, which I lived in and rented out some of them. So I became a live-in landlord. But it wasn't until 98 when I moved out of that first house, bought another one that I moved into with my friends, and that first house became a student property. So that's 25 years of being an actual landlord, and then 20 years of teaching other people how to do it.
Yeah. So I think it's fair to say, you're the longest running consistent trainer in the UK that's been investing all the way through. And of course, yes, we know every market has its cycles. The property market is no different. And we've seen some cycles over the last 20 years, haven't we? So we're in another period of change now. And yes, today we're going to talk about, can you still make money in property, Simon?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? It feels easier to make money when the market's going up. And in the UK, as I always say, because we live on this island with a limited amount of accommodation and increasing population, generally the values and the rents go up, especially with inflation right now. That kind of helps those things. But every market is cyclical. It doesn't always go up. It has its corrections. We obviously had the huge property market crash in 2008 that was caused by the global financial crisis. And it was, people were losing money and banks weren't lending, etc. And I don't think we're going to have the kind of crash we had back then, but we're definitely seeing a correction. Prices are coming down. I think they've got further to go. And I think we'll probably correct back to where prices were before the pandemic and before the surprising boom we had during those pandemic years.
Yeah, because lots of people are, understandably a bit nervous at the moment. They're scared. They're yes, waiting to see what's going to happen, right? But does that actually make it easier to find deals?
Yeah, it does, because obviously in a booming market where you have a seller's market where there are more buyers than there are sellers, which is what we had the last couple of years, it's harder to find deals. But then in the current market conditions where the values are coming down, and there are still lots of people who need to sell. And I say increasing numbers of people. We have a lot more landlords who are just fed up, or the interest rates might be too high. They're looking to get rid of those properties. We've got homeowners who maybe can't afford their home mortgages. They're looking to sell, or people just have to sell because they're relocating, whatever it might be. So there's a big supply of property for sale on the market. And yet there aren't as many buyers because, as you said, Christian, a lot of people are nervous. They're worried. If values are coming down, maybe I should wait till it hits the bottom, or they're trying to buy, they're struggling to get finance, etc. So there are less buyers in the market, more sellers. So it's a buyer's market. And actually, many people are waiting. But I think that's probably the wrong thing to do. If you know what you're doing, you have a bit of courage, getting out there and picking up some really good deals while prices are coming down is definitely the right thing to be doing.
Yeah. Now, there's so many strategies in property. You teach, probably most of them, Simon. Certainly, one of the, I guess, the entry level strategies is buy to let, right? And people are doing the numbers at the moment, and they're simply saying, well, look, it just doesn't stack up, right? So let's begin with your thoughts on that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So over the years, and I've been teaching 20 years now, we've always used an interest rate of 6% when we're looking at a property to stack it up to see if it makes money. So we always use an interest rate of 6%. That's because prior to the credit crunch, the Bank of England base rate was about 5.5, 5.7. So that was the kind of rate we were effectively paying on mortgages. Then the credit crunch came and interest rates actually came down. So for the last decade, the Bank of England base rate has only been 0.5%. So what that meant, there are lots of people who got mortgages before the credit crunch, and they were effectively paying 2 or 3% on their mortgage. And if they had a single let property, they were making lots of money on that single let property. And people who were investing after the credit crunch were buying and again getting mortgages, maybe 3, 4%. They were making good money on their property. But the reason we use 6%, we knew that interest rates at some point would always go up. Now, they've shot up in the last 18 months, pretty quicker than most people expected, but we knew that would happen. So all of my clients who have trained with us, they've stacked their properties at 6%. So even though their cash flow has reduced, they should still be making money. But there are many people who maybe did train with us, or they just worked out the mortgage cost based on the mortgage at the time when they bought the property that was maybe 3 or 4%. Now they're paying 6, 8. Some people I know are even paying over 10% because they've got variable mortgages. And so what that means is many people who've got properties, the interest they're paying each month is more than the rental income coming in. So those properties are not making money, which obviously is not good. Now, bear in mind, we have to be just aware, I'm only talking about people who are on variable mortgages. If people have had a fixed mortgage, they've not been affected by the interest rate rises yet. And there's something like 1.8 million mortgages are on fixed terms, which are due to come to the end at some point during 2023. So that means for a lot of people, homeowners who might have had nice low mortgages, I've seen people where their mortgages sometimes tripled or quadrupled. And that suddenly is unaffordable for many people. And then also investors, same thing. They've had a nice low mortgage and suddenly it's gone. Now, to be fair, rents have also gone up over the last couple of years, maybe as much as 20%. That's definitely helped. But there are some landlords who've got problems with property that don't stack up anymore. And if you're buying a property, you might be paying 6% on your mortgage, but the stress test that banks are using might be 7, even 8%. And so they just don't make money. So many people are saying property investing is dead, but that's because they think that property investing is just buy to let. But as you alluded to earlier, Christian, there are many, many strategies we can use. And so my recommendation in the current market conditions, there are 2 strategies you really should be looking at. One of them is the good old HMO, house of multiple occupation, where you take a house, you rent out individual rooms, and you as the landlord generally pay the bills as well. And what you're doing, you're providing really affordable accommodation for people who don't want to live on their own or can't afford to live on their own, because if they lived on their own, they'd pay the rent as well as all the bills. So living in an HMO is far more cost effective, but it's also very profitable for you because you're getting all that combined rent. And even after paying the bills, you still get much more income than you would on a single let property. Now, the one caveat to this question is really important is in most areas, there is an oversupply of HMOs. So you might think, well, why am I saying you should do HMOs? The distinction is we want to do very high-end, what we call co-living HMOs. And unfortunately, most HMOs are very average. They've got magnolia walls and not very good furniture. If you're going to do HMOs, you have to do a very high-quality product, which means not only do you attract a better quality tenant who's prepared to pay a bit more, but also those tenants will stay for longer. And the distinction I also want to make is it's not just about selling a room in a house. If we create this co-living community, they're buying into a community. And we can do things in the property, like in the kitchen, diner, make sure there's a table big enough for all of the housemates to sit around. Make sure there's communal space outside, so sitting space, barbecue areas. So you're really trying to create this community, and people don't want to leave that community. So HMOs, when done correctly, high end is absolutely one thing you should be doing. And then they do stack up. They do still make really good cash flow, despite the high interest rates, despite high energy costs. And then the other strategy is serviced accommodation, where we're renting something very short term for a couple of nights. And it could be to contractors, could be to holidaymakers or whatever. They're paying a short-term rent, so it's much higher rent. Now, you don't have it occupied all the time, and the tenancy can go up and down. It's not as stable as HMOs might be, but you can make really good money. And on average, you're aiming for about a 70% occupation rate. That's what you should be targeting. And you want to make sure it stacks up at least 50% occupancy. Otherwise, it's not a good enough deal. And again, those can be very profitable. You can get finance on them right now. They stack up. So these are the two strategies that work incredibly well in this current market where money is tight for people, but there's still really good demand for those two strategies, and they both make good money for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know on previous podcasts, we've talked about another strategy, which is purchase lease options as well. I imagine in a market like this, that would be another good strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? I refer to purchase lease options as a strategy, but actually they're not really a strategy. They're a tool. A purchase lease option, will explain what it is who aren't sure. It's a tool that you can use in conjunction with any other strategy. So if you're doing HMOs, you could do a purchase lease option to acquire that property. SA, if you're doing development, commercial to residential development, if you're doing single let still, buy to let, you can use an option. And what it is basically is it's a tool that we use to control a property that we don't own. So we find someone who wants to sell the property, want to get away from the hassle, the responsibility, the liability of the mortgage. And we step into their shoes. We take away that hassle for them. And we pay them a certain amount each month, a kind of guaranteed rent. In the same way, if you had a mortgage, you've got to commit to paying a certain amount each month to the owner. We pay that for them. And the idea is we rent their property out in a more profitable way. So maybe it's already an HMO, but they just weren't managing it very well. They had some empty rooms. Well, we add value and manage it correctly and make sure it's full. Or maybe it's a single let. We turn it into an HMO. We turn it into SA, obviously subject to mortgage approval and planning permission and leases. So we need to make sure we do things correctly. But we basically rent it for more than we pay the landlord. So we can make cash flow on an asset that we don't own. And because we don't actually own it, we haven't bought it, we haven't got to put in a big 25% deposit. We haven't had to get a mortgage, which in the current market, even if it stacks up, takes 3, 4, 5 months. So this can be done very, very quickly. So we can find the right kind of motivated seller and within 3 or 4 weeks, have the legal paperwork done, which we always do through solicitors, take on the property and start generating cash flow. So it's great. And certainly back in 2008, when it was very difficult to get finance, you had people who wanted to get rid of the property, the liability. We couldn't actually buy, but we could take it on a purchase option, take on the responsibility. And we basically agree that we're going to look after it for them. We're going to babysit their mortgage if they have a mortgage at all. And then in maybe sometime in the future, 3 to 5 years, we look to buy their property from them. And we fix a price today. And hopefully, although the market's coming down a bit, there's enough time for it to recover. And the future price that it's worth is more than the price we're paying. So we can actually afford to pay the owner, theoretically, the full market price right now. And sometimes people say, well, this sounds great for you, but why on earth would an owner agree to this? Well, if they're going to sell a property maybe worth 200,000 now, realistic in a declining market, they might only get 180 for it. But we can offer them 200. So we can give them the full price they want if they're prepared to wait for when they get the money. And that's the big caveat. This strategy only works for people who want to get rid of a property, but they don't need the money now. Now, most people selling a property, they're selling because they want to get the equity. They want to use it to pay off some other debt or maybe invest in a business or pay for their daughter's wedding. So they're selling the property because they want to get the equity. That's the majority of people. But there's a smaller group of people who are just selling because they don't really want the property. So they could be people like landlords who are retiring. We're seeing more and more of those right now. Or someone who's inherited the property. They don't really need the money. They don't want to spend the money doing it up. They just want to get rid of it. So we can take those properties on. So people who don't need the money now, we can actually offer them more money than someone else would give them if they're prepared to wait for the money. So that's a big advantage. We take the hassle away and it can be done in 3 or 4 weeks instead of 3 or 4 months if they have an actual buyer. And also, remember, we pay them a small amount each month. Maybe that's to cover their mortgage and a little bit of profit, or maybe there's no mortgage. It's more than they'd make if they sold and put the money in the bank. So not only are they getting eventually a higher price for the property than if they sold right now, if you add up the extra income they've had over the 3 to 5 years, they're also getting more money there. So they can actually get more money from it as well. So if you understand the benefits to the seller and you can find those particular sellers, it can be a real win-win for everyone involved.
Yeah. And I guess those are some of the skills which you need to learn. You need to really be able to, position it to the owner, right? So they see those benefits.
Yeah, you got to get your head around it, first of all, why it's good. And for many people, it doesn't work, and it's a mistake I see people make all the time. They learn about this incredibly powerful property investing tool and they try and use it on every deal. And it's just not going to work on the majority of deals. And they think, oh, this doesn't work, but they're just not using it right. So you're absolutely right. Education to learn how to do this properly is really important, which, by the way, is why I'm sure I'm finally about to release my next book. My first book is known as Property Magic. It's an Amazon bestseller, over 100,000 copies in circulation. My new book, which is Lease Option Magic, is coming out very, very soon. And I think we're going to put a link in the show notes for people. And what I'm doing is people who buy the book during the launch period, we're going to give them a whole load of extra free online training to complement the book to help build their belief and show them how they can do this. And the book will tell people what to do, but it's more about raising people's awareness of what exactly can they use these powerful tools for, when are they appropriate, how do they find people who want to do this, and then how do they do the legal paperwork and how do they move it all forward. So I can't teach everything in a book, but it's certainly enough to get going, and it's really going to help a lot more people understand this, because I don't know about you interview a lot of people, you speak to a lot of people. I think a lot of people have heard about this tool, but they don't really know how to use it and they kind of dismiss it. And that's a real shame, because just like it was back in 2008, 2009, this is going to be a far more popular tool to use right now in the current market conditions.
Yeah, that sounds brilliant. If you could share a link, I will absolutely make sure that's in the show notes.
Yes,
so anyone listening now can click on that and register. Lease options, sometimes I hear people say, oh, it works in certain parts of the UK, not so much in others. What's your comment on that?
Yeah,
Simon?
definitely. And again, often people who are making these comments don't actually know because they haven't done them. So remember, it's all about the circumstance of the seller. If someone wants to get rid of the property, but they don't need the money right now, then that might be an appropriate solution. And we've had people do options literally all over the country. The one thing I will say, you can't actually do them in Scotland. And that's because the Law Society in Scotland, they don't really like them. They think, you could get problems in the future. So we have people who do something similar in Scotland, but I technically say, look, if you're in Scotland, don't do it. But we have a lot of people in Scotland who are doing it south of the border, kind of Newcastle kind of area, etc. So that's the one restriction. But yeah, it works everywhere. We have a lot of people who've picked up options in London, and people think, oh, surely in London you can easily sell the property. Well, maybe not. That's always the case. And you've got to be, when you're investing, you've got to be very careful about your beliefs, about what's possible and what's not possible, because your beliefs will either propel you forward or they will hold you back. And sometimes we have a belief based on our experience and our knowledge. And I'd encourage everyone, when you're investing, always to challenge and question your beliefs, because they may not be supporting you. Does that make sense, Christian?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, it certainly does. And, I guess there could be two types of people listening to the podcast now, Simon. Someone who isn't yet in property and they're, again, nervous. Can you still, reach financial security, financial independence? And what, if they pick the right, strategy from the beginning? Obviously, sometimes you try things, they don't always work. You have to readjust. But, is there any reason why someone should not progress with property as their main
Absolutely not. I think property is one of the many ways, as everyone listens to this, there are many ways you can make wealth. But if you think about it, property is probably one of the most stable and safe ways to invest, as long as you know what you're doing. People do lose money sometimes because they don't educate themselves, or they make expensive mistakes. That can happen. But if you think about it, if you go to a bank and ask them to borrow money to invest in shares, they probably won't want to lend you money to do that, but they will lend you money to invest in property. Why? Because they know it's the safest asset. And, it's sometimes people compare the stock market, the kind of returns you get on average, to property. Say, well, stock market grows quicker than property. And yes, it does generally, but generally you don't get leverage in stock market. You can, if you're very experienced, you can get leverage. But the whole point about property is you generally use some of your money, but most of other people's money. And you can partner with the bank. Here's the great thing about property. You can partner with the bank. As long as the deal stacks up and makes money, they'll lend you 3/4 of the money. You put 1/4 of the money in, 25%. You pay them interest. And then as the value goes up over time, which it does, because we live on this island with a limited amount of accommodation, in 10, 20 years' time, that property might have doubled and doubled again. But guess what? You just have to give the bank their 75% back, and you get to keep all the profit. How cool is that? That's how you can work with banks and use their money and their leverage. So absolutely, you can do that. You do need to educate yourself. You do need to pick the right strategy. There are certain strategies you don't want to do in a falling market. A common strategy a lot of people start with, they buy a house, they do it up, and they sell it on for a profit. It's called flipping property. That's a great strategy in a rising market. You don't really want to do that in a falling market. Another strategy people do in a rising market is they do off-plan purchases. That's where you find a developer who's building a block of apartments or a number of houses, and you put down a small deposit. And then by the time you come to buy the property, once it's built, because it's not built yet, in a year or two, hopefully the value's gone up over time. Now, in a rising market, that's a great strategy. In a falling market, you really don't want to be doing that. And actually, my personal view, if I can give a couple more tips, if you've got time to do that, Christian, I don't think it's a good idea personally to buy brand new properties. They might seem attractive, might think low maintenance, tenants like to live there. And yes, they do like to live there. But it's a bit like when you buy a brand new car and you drive it off the forecourt, the value kind of comes down a bit. You couldn't sell it the next day for the same amount because, well, it's no longer a new car. You've driven it. A bit like a new building. You buy a building, you're going to pay a premium because it's a nice new building. But as soon as you've got tenants in there, and they've been in there for 6 months, well, it's no longer a brand new building. Someone's been there before. So the value you couldn't sell it for the same amount of money the next month. So I think you need to recognize that. And if you buy brand new buildings, you're buying at a premium. It's much better to find older second-hand buildings. And by the way, I prefer houses to apartments because you get better capital growth over time. I've been doing this a long time. I've seen and experienced. I've got houses, I've got apartments. I can absolutely tell you, if I had my time again, I would only buy houses. Now, places like London, of course, most things are apartments. But rest of the country, if you can afford a little bit more money and buy a house that's an older house, and you can add some value to it through refurbishment, you can then refinance it and take some or maybe even all of your money out. You've got the asset, making you money, keeping it long-term. And remember, property is a long-term thing. If you follow my golden rules for my first book, Property Magic, which are very quickly 5 golden rules. Number 1, we want to buy from motivated sellers. And in this current market, there are more motivated sellers than ever before. So a great time to buy if you know what you're doing. Rule number 2, we only buy in an area with a strong rental demand. So we know if the current tenants leave, we can easily and quickly find other people who want to live in this property. And we've seen a huge boom in rental demand and rental rates going up. You've got a good property in a good area, you should always be able to rent it out. Number 3, we must make cash flow. It must stack up. In other words, at the end of the month, after we take the rent, less the mortgage, the insurance, the maintenance, the management fees, there must be profit left over. If there isn't, it's not a good deal. We don't want to do that. It must put cash in our pocket every single month. Rule number 4, we're buying for long term. So we're holding a long term. Rule number 5, we must have a little bit of a cash buffer, some money put aside just to cover the things that may not be covered by insurance in case something goes wrong, so we can get the property fixed, get it rented out again to make sure it's an asset putting money into our pocket. So if you follow the 5 golden rules, particularly number 2, 3, and 4, you know you can rent it out, you know you're going to make cash flow and you're holding long term. It doesn't matter if you buy something now and maybe in 6 or 12 months later, it's gone down in value. That doesn't matter because we're holding long term. We know the value is going to come back. So those are principles that you can use in the declining market we have right now. And even if someone's completely new, you could use strategies such as purchase lease options, where without even having to buy the property, put in a deposit and get a mortgage, you can see, do I like doing rent to rent? Do I like doing SA? Do I like doing HMOs? And it's a great way to test the market. And if I, God forbid, if I lost everything and had to start from scratch, with the knowledge I have right now, if I was starting completely new, the thing I would learn would be purchase lease options, because they can be used in conjunction with every other strategy. So rather than working out, do I want to do HMOs? Do I want to do SA? Do I want to do single lets? just learn options, which is a way of acquiring property without a deposit, without a mortgage, and then you could apply that to any strategy you want. That's what I would do if I was starting.
Yeah, no, that's good advice. Both for the new people and for existing people, because look, people are certainly fearful, and those with portfolios now are looking at other ways to maximize those profits, right?
One other thing I just add here as well, which is an interesting point. There are a lot of landlords who are selling. Some are selling up, completely retiring. But I've been a landlord a long time myself. Every year I look at my portfolio and I might sell one or two properties that are not doing so well, and I reinvest that money in better properties. So I'm not particularly growing my portfolio, but I'm just making it stronger over the years. And so anyone listening to this who's got properties and maybe it's a single let, it's not such a good rental for you anymore, actually you can use purchase lease options to sell your property to what we call a tenant buyer. So this is someone who's a tenant at the moment. They'd love to get their foot on the ladder, but they can't do it, particularly right now with the difficulty with mortgages. Well, as long as you know they could get a mortgage in the future, they got enough income or they will have enough income, you could put them in as a tenant buyer for a few years, give them an option to buy. And as a tenant buyer, they put down a little bit of getting started money, £3,000 to £5,000. You get a bit of cash up front, and they got a different mindset to a normal tenant. You see, a tenant buyer, it's their home. They might spend money on a new kitchen because they're adding value to their property. A normal tenant wouldn't do that. A normal tenant, something goes wrong, they call you need to come and fix it. Well, they've got to fix it because it's like their own home. So if you've got properties you're struggling with at the moment, you've not got normal tenants, you could see if they want to become a tenant buyer or even get rid of them, put some new people in, find some people who want to get their foot on the ladder, make them a tenant buyer. They get an option to buy the property. They look after the property. You don't have any management fees. You don't have any maintenance costs. They take it on, and it can increase the profitability of existing property for you. And it's a way of selling properties that you don't actually want. And it's helping those people get a foot on the ladder, get started. It's a true win-win.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I imagine there's a lot more tips like that inside the book. So I'll remind everyone to definitely click the link, check out the show notes. And again, it just it reinforces the importance of having the right like-minded people around you, being part of a community. Your events, Simon, they're back up and running after the pandemic. If someone wants to check out a PIN event and find out where the closest one is, where should they go for that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have 50 meetings around the country. When COVID came, we anticipated, we very quickly switched to virtual meetings and continued throughout those difficult times. And then we've come back, and most of the meetings are now physical. There are a few that are still virtual. And actually, it's not just UK. We have people listening from around the world. We now have meetings in the Netherlands. We have meetings in the Middle East as well. So you can go to pinmeeting.co.uk. And I'm sure we'll put a link in the show notes, pinmeeting.co.uk. And you can come and check out. It's only £20 to come to a meeting or something like that, £25, and come and try. But I tell you what, Christian, I think you actually have a voucher code that we can put in the show notes as well. So as a gift from me and from Christian and from Kevin, if you've never been to a PIN meeting before, look in the show notes, go to pinmeeting.co.uk, pick the meeting that's relevant for you, scroll down, check you can make the date, and then where it says pay, click on pay with a voucher code, use the code that's in the show notes, and come and check out your first PIN meeting as our guest, completely free, and come and see what you've been missing out on. Because you're right, getting a community, like-minded people who, when you say you want to replace your income in the next year or two, they're going to say, oh, great, how can we help? Rather than, what, are you mad? Which is the reaction you might get from family, friends, and work colleagues. So you've got to get the right people around, particularly in a time when there is a lot of uncertainty, and the general public view would be, oh my God, property, I'm not sure that's a good thing to do. If you listen to the wrong people, you will miss what I believe is one of the best buying opportunities of this decade. So get the right people around you, get the right support, get the right knowledge, get out and make the most of this incredible buying opportunity, which might only be here for 12 to 18 months.
Yeah. Oh, Simon, thanks so much. It's always a pleasure to hear your wisdom over the last 25 years of being an investor. So thank you very much for sharing everything with us today.
Thanks so much. And thanks for asking me.
All right, then. So a good few points I'm sure we can dive further into there, Kevin. Before we do that, let's head over to Trustpilot and read out one of our latest reviews this week. And I'm going to pull out one from Darren, who says, Kevin Whelan kindly agreed to have a chat with me regarding my personal pensions and to make sure my trust has been set up correctly. I've picked up some very useful information through the Wealth Builders podcast, and I hope to improve my knowledge and explore new things and take further action moving forward. Thanks again, Kevin, for all of your help. That's
very nice. And then, you know what? He's also offered to give me a game of golf at the Belfry. So now it's on record, Mr. Block. But anyway, he's always reminding me, saying, when are you coming, Kevin? When are you coming? So we have to get out and about. And on our Wealth Builder Trail, we've got some new events we'll be doing soon, Chris. I don't know whether any of those are worth signposting, but certainly we'll be getting out and about. And I've got to get to the Midlands to have a game of golf at the Belfry with Ian. So, Ian, thank you so much for that. And I hope the shout out is worthwhile for you.
Yeah, sure. So event-wise, we are definitely finalising the next few events. The best place to go, if you want to check in, see what's coming up, is wealthbuilders.co.uk/events. Okay, so on to Simon then. And well, look, the question that we posed was, can you still make money from property? And I think Simon answered, yes, you definitely can. So whether you're just starting out, or whether you're an existing property investor, perhaps you need to change tact. You need to review your portfolio. He said that that's something he does annually as well. Yeah. Something any wealth builder would review their assets, right? Make sure that things still work no matter what the pillar is.
Yeah, I think there's a notion spread by, I don't know where it ever came from. It's an odd one. I hear people talk about passive income. You hear it a lot, don't you? Oh yeah, I want to build up a supply of passive income. But the whole point about wealth building is it's never passive. There's always some level of participation you need, whether it's to review how your portfolio is doing, whether it's to review when your interest rates are affected if you're borrowing money. And reviewing the sources of things, because one asset you've got in one place today is fundamentally different. So the double-edged sword of debt, for example, we know that interest rates have gone up. We know that borrowing money is still always available for property, as Simon explained, but the underwriting can often be tighter. But people forget there's money right under their own noses. They can use their pension as a source of funding in appropriate circumstances. And as always, we give guidance, we don't give advice at Wealth Builders. But for many, many hundreds of property-minded entrepreneurs within Wealth Builders, we've helped them see that the pension that they've got, which has been earmarked and parked almost for 20, 30 years down the line, they can bring that money into play today, so they can build assets today and acquire assets today that will increase in value, at least potentially. I take on board Simon's view about the long-term island nature of our country and our love affair with property, and the long-term property prices go up. And that's certainly been the case. But hey, I said earlier on, you get disruptions, you get disasters. Will we have a fundamental property prices go down forever? I don't think that will happen. There's no evidence that will happen. But will there be a correction or a crash? Well, there always is. You just have to expect it to happen and understand that your flow is interrupted when interest rates go up and when underwriting is tight if you're borrowing money. But then you can change your flow by getting funding from elsewhere. So I think the creativity is what's needed when in uncertain times. So that creativity comes from understanding all the pillars, understanding all of your assets, being aware of what they are, where they are, what they're doing. But in addition to that is to be aware of that sometimes new tools are created. And new tools are created, and that's leverage as well, isn't it, Chris? We know this through wealth dynamics. It's the leverage of working with other people and their distinctions. You can get leverage from that. But also it's the leverage of new tools and new technology. And AI is certainly one of those tools. And I think, although we didn't mention it, I think Simon's running a bit of a program soon on how to use AI to help you find the opportunities. Although I know you didn't discuss it in any detail, but we've touched on AI many times now, and using the technology to help you. So look out for that, or maybe we can even signpost that, Chris. But just the tool of lease options, for example, purchase lease options, is about control of an asset. You don't necessarily, at least at this point, have to buy the asset and therefore spend your money, borrow money at high interest rates. You can control the asset. And that can be very powerful at a time when the circumstances to your finances are not suitable. In other words, you can keep going even though your finances tell you ordinarily you couldn't. So that distinction of lease options and really calls into question the micro position where the world is affected, but some landlords want to sell. Some landlords don't need the money right now. We've definitely seen that happen in businesses. We've seen business owners who want to retire, but they don't necessarily need the money right now because they've done well over the years. They want that business to carry on. Like I was talking to someone about schools, private schools. They just want the schools to carry on. They're less concerned about the money. And similarly, it's the case. I've seen that with bed and breakfast. There are some bed and breakfast owners who are kind of retiring, but they don't want this to go into residential. They want it to be maintained. They love their area, but they're just too tired. So you have to look at that in an aging demographic and see, well, where will those disrupted people come from? And disruptions are happening every day to almost everyone. We all go through life being disrupted by something, whether it's a health problem, a job problem, a finance problem, or whatever problem. And how people deal with that is critical. And I think the wealth building skill is to ethically solve the problems of others, never to take advantage, but those opportunities are always there if you can arrive at a true win-win. And I've seen Simon try and do that and teach that, and I applaud him for doing that. And I think he's always coming to our table and others with enthusiasm and a desire to help people do a better job for themselves and create wealth for themselves. So, I think there were some good lessons in there for sure.
Absolutely. And as was mentioned, education always being that first step. It certainly is the first step in our Wheel of Wealth, which we show our members and help them to understand the process to generate capital or cash flow from any asset, any strategy. And education comes in lots of different forms, listening to this podcast, joining a Facebook group, reading a book. You don't always have to pay for education, but sometimes people choose to take that step. And very grateful for Simon for offering the opportunity to download and get that copy of his book when that's released very shortly.
Well, absolutely, because normally you find publications are creatures of their time. So when I wrote Save a Fortune, that was 2004. If I did an overlay of the interest rate examples and stuff I did then, they'd be not relevant today. So it's good if there's a tool that's really fresh. So definitely look into the book, because that's giving you a tool that's available right now, that you can use today. Isn't something like The Richest Man in Babylon, which is principles based and written 100 years ago. It's something you can use right now. Not that I'm against principles. I'm fundamentally for principles. But the other thing I think is hugely relevant, Chris, and I think Simon touched on it but didn't dwell on it, which is, you touched on the idea of the PIN meetings, for example. Now, other meetings are available, and that's not for us to say, but the PIN meeting is an example where people are going to a venue or on a Zoom, so in a room or on a Zoom, where their purpose is to share, connect, and to build a community. And I think that's hugely powerful in uncertain times, because everybody's going through the same thoughts, and then how they deal with it gives you those distinctions. So whether you join the PIN community, and it's great that there's a offer if you've never been before to go free of charge, and thank you to Simon for that gift. But similarly, we'll be inviting parents who want to be great money role models for their children to join a community of parents. So you're not left to your own devices, goodness me, it's tough enough being a parent, right? I'm not trying to teach parenting, but I would say we can teach through case studies and community what other people are doing that are really influencing for the positive their children's lives. And in a world where we're always looking to build our assets, and in the end, you think about this one, Chris, in the end, if you build assets sustainably, they will outlive you. So you've got to think about how you're going to pass those assets on. Now, for some people who've got children, that's fine. You deal with that legacy in the most positive way, give wisdom and encouragement to children not to be entitled so that they can take those assets in a form of stewardship and build them for future generations, or philanthropically. Who do you want to leave your money to, and how are you going to make sure you deal with that? So these are all parts of the decision-making around wealth building. But the starting point, I guess, for most people is to get to the place where they've built their wealth. And right now, so many people are sitting on the fence, hesitating, waiting for something to happen to them. And my answer is, it's not going to happen to you. Disruptions happen to you. Positive things generally don't just happen. You've got to make them happen by taking that responsibility.
Very well said once again. And if you're not already connected to either ourselves or to Simon, then hit the link on the show notes and certainly join the WealthBuilders community. Consume some of our free resources through our website. Go and find out what others are doing and get connected. And would love to see you at future events, as Kevin just mentioned, as we certainly push on with the mission to help the families, from cradle to grave.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Chris, for for having a very good interview with Simon today. And what did he say? 28 years a landlord, 20 years teaching it. It's nearly as long as me. So
all right.
Good to listen to sage people every now and again. We're not gurus, but we are, I suppose, guides, and guidance is given free. So hopefully, we've given a distinction or two today that will help somebody become a wealth builder instead of a fence sitter.
Yeah, and maybe help a few more. If you enjoyed this episode, if you think someone else might also enjoy it, please hit the share button, send it to them as a little gift, and help us build the community and spread the message as far and wide as we can. So thanks for listening today. As always, we'll be back same time, same place next week.
Yes, we will. And until then, my friend, see ya.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget that we are constantly updating our resources inside the WealthBuilders membership site to help you create, build, and protect your wealth. Head over to wealthbuilders.co.uk/membership right now for free access. That's wealthbuilders.co.uk/membership.